just going to go through the basics of making the blood film examination. And you can see that we're using a spreader slide here. This is how the little corner chipped off so that this width here is slightly narrower than the rest of the slide. And you put the drop of blood on the slide, put the spreader down in front of that drop, bring it backwards so that the blood makes contact with the spreader and runs along the width of the spreader. And then you advance it forward smoothly and fairly briskly, and you don't lift up the spreader until all of the blood has been spread out. What we're aiming for is a smear which has a sort of fairly square end rather than a big tapered end, and a nice thin monolayer here. So what can go wrong then? Sometimes the smear is too long. That might be because the animal's anemic, so the blood's very thin. So if your smear is too long, there's two things you can do. You can put a bit less blood on, or you can use your spreader and advance it more quickly, so spread more quickly. Conversely, if the smear is too short, that might be because the animal's got a very high hematocrit, like a greyhound, for example, then you need to use your spreader and move it more slowly. Sometimes there's streaks or raggedy tails at the end. That might be because the spreader needs replacing. It might be rough or dirty at the ends. Sometimes there's sort of weird hazy gaps all throughout the film. That might be because the slide is greasy. Maybe it's because it was handled with fingertips before it was used, so you could clean the slides or get some new slides. And if the feathered edge is very thick, that may be because there was a bit of blood in front of the spreader. So here's one which had a very irregular, dirty spreader, giving you these horrible rough edges. Here's one with fat or grease on the slide, giving you these gaps in between. This is one which had blood in front of the smear, the third one along. This one's a bit too short, so we need to go a bit more slowly with our spreader. This is about perfect. It's got a fairly square end, so we can easily zoom along here looking for platelet clumps. Then we can look here in our examination area easily to find what we're looking for. So this is the ideal type of smear here. So we're going to look at the blood film in a sort of logical way. First of all, we're going to look at the feathered edge to see if there's any clumping. And then we're going to move from that into the just right zone where we examine the cells. It's a really good idea to get frosted slides like this so that you can label them in pencil. And it's important, you know, if you have, especially if an anemic patient, it's important that smear is logged and kept properly. Diff-quick stains are adequate for hematology. There's one stain in particular called Hemagur, which seems to work very well and provide very nice colour changes. But, you know, the various diff-quicks are all adequate. It's important to keep these diff-quick stain pots clean. If they get full of precipitate, it'll just encourage the formation of even more precipitate. So every so often you need to tip it away, clean these pots out with alcohol, and start again. We have this Hematech. I'm sorry this picture's not brilliant, but you can just about see there's a sort of grooved area here. The slides get slotted into the grooves, and it rotates around very slowly. They gradually move along here, fall down, and then move along this area here where the stain and the buffer is added and then dried at the end. So that's really nice if you've got lots of slides. And it's really helpful to use a cover slip. This is particularly useful with hematology because you can do a lot of hematology on a 40 lens, but you can't see, a 40 is a dry lens, you can't see very well unless you have a cover slip on. So you can either use oil or you can get a specific mounting medium, like Surefix or Arc Mount, and that's a permanent glue. The problem with using the glue is that sometimes it kind of oozes out of the edge of the cover slip, and if you get it on your objective, you're going to break it. So oil is perfectly adequate for this. So as I've said already, you're going to have a logical approach to the blood film exam, and you can do this very quickly with practice. First of all, check the feathered edge for clumps, then move to the just right zone, and that's where you're going to look at the cells. And look at red cells, white cells, platelets, one after the other, looking for size, shape, colour, inclusions, doing your differential count for your white cells and your morphology check. So it doesn't matter which order you do those things in, but you must have a logical approach so you don't forget. So this is a platelet clump seen at the feathered edge of a smear, so loads of platelets all stuck together with a neutrophil in there as well. And so if you see this, you know that the platelet count is falsely low. And with this very large kind of clumping, you can assume that the platelet count is actually normal. Sometimes there's a bit of a dilemma where you see a few small clumps, but you don't know if this clumping is sufficient to account for the low analyser count entirely, or whether actually the animal does have a bit of thrombocytopenia as well. So in that situation, you're just going to have to take another sample and hope that it isn't clumped there. You can sort of back up your analyser count by doing an estimate of platelet numbers, count the number you can see on a times 100 field. Usually we do an average of about 5 fields, so count the number and then multiply that number by 20. So say you can see an average of 10 platelets in a field, that means your platelet count is 200. If you saw only 1 per field, your platelet count is only 20. That's obviously severely low. This technique isn't very accurate, but it's accurate enough to say the platelet count is very low, i.e. low enough to bleed, it's probably okay, or it looks high. So what about platelet size? Does it really matter? Well, in cats, platelets vary in size a lot, and it's not significant. This is going back to the dog with a platelet, very, very high platelet count, which actually had a leukemia of the platelet line. Usually in dogs, if you see big platelets, we tend to think it means there's accelerated platelet production. But you can see in this case, this dog has essential thrombocythemia, myeloproliferative disease. That's another cause for large platelets. So the rule of thumb is in cats, it doesn't matter what size they are. In dogs, large ones usually mean increased production, but sometimes it can mean bone marrow disease. And then we do our white cell differential count using a sort of castellation pattern where we drive along the edges a bit, then into the middle of the film a bit, then back to the edge a bit, like that. The reason for doing that is that the larger cells tend to get pushed out and the smaller ones are in the middle. So to get an even count, you need to do that. So really the main focus of this is to look at the red cell morphology. What can the red cells, what can the morphology help to tell us about why the animal's anemic? So we've talked a bit about this already, but we need to know if it's regenerative or non-regenerative. And we also need to see if we can detect an underlying cause. So this is the normal appearance of red cells for dogs and cats. So in cats, you can see there's not very much in the way of central pallor. Perhaps there's a bit of a paler area in some of the red cells, but generally not much pallor. But there is a bit of variation. So this cell's bigger than its neighbour here. Whereas in dogs, they're all about the same size in a healthy dog, and you do have this area of central pallor in the middle. So you may see the odd polychromatic cell in a healthy animal because obviously they do have small numbers of reticulocytes entering their bloodstream all the time, replacing the old cells which have died off. So we said the count is about 1% or up to 80 times 10 to the 9. So you are going to see the odd polychromatic cell. And then if it's regenerative, then following our 3-day time delay, which we talked about, you're going to have an increase in reticulocytes. And so you're going to see increased numbers of polychromatic cells on the blood film. So here's our normal colour cells, and here's our reticulocytes. Can you just check, Bruce, can people see this arrow? I'm not sure if people can see the arrow and put it. Yes, it's visible.
Absolutely, it's visible. It's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a nucleated red cell there. So it's the same colour as a reticulocyte, but we have a nucleus inside it as well. So there's another feature of regeneration. So this dog has plenty of polychromatic cells in each field. It's markedly regenerative. And subjectively, we can grade the polychromasia. The number of cells we can see in each field gives us an idea of mild, moderate, or severe, or some labs use a scoring system here to grade how regenerative it is here. But if it's got 4 to 8 cells per high power field, then it's very regenerative. Because of the way in which the reticulocytes mature, what happens is they start off being larger than normal and darker purple. Then they lose that purple coloration, become still large, but the normal colour, and then they shrink down to the normal size. So what you may see on the blood film is cells which are, if I go back to that image there, cells which are polychromatic and large, and then other cells which are not polychromatic, but they're still a bit large, and then shrinking down a bit to the normal size. So a bit of variation in size and also variation in colour. What else can we see with regeneration? We might see nucleated red cells. It's really important if you see that to think about, is it accompanied by regeneration? Are there polychromatic cells there as well? Or is it just that you've got lots of nucleated cells and no regeneration? If you see that, that could be a problem with the bone marrow, or sometimes it's seen with a splenic problem as well. Sometimes you see basophilic stippling and Howell jolly bodies. So this is, I'm afraid I've stolen this picture from Sharm's textbook, but these are quite distinct Howell jolly bodies, as you can see in these red cells. That's just a small remnant of nuclear material.